Vince Carter meant everything to pro basketball in Canada. You can't tell the story of the Toronto Raptors' rise to relevance and excellence without featuring Vince. You can't track the new generation of Canadian hoops lovers nor the pipeline of Canadian pro players without acknowledging Vince's influence. Carter was a pioneer, a superstar, an icon, and an inspiration. And for over a decade, the whole city of Toronto hated his guts. In 1998, the Toronto Raptors had only existed for 3 years, and just like all 3-year-olds, they sucked. Gaudy jerseys and fun young players generated neither wins nor significant Canadian enthusiasm for a winter pro sport that wasn't hockey. The crappy Vancouver Grizzlies weren't helping matters, though they too looked great. Raps GM Glenn Grunwald changed things in Toronto. He ditched the existing young core, then on draft night 98, pulled off an unusual pick and swap to land North Carolina swingman Vince Carter. Carter was coming off 3 sensational years at UNC, in which he provided wins and astounding above-the-rim highlights. Here was a perfect new face of the franchise. Here was a player people couldn't help but compare to another high-flying Tar Heel wing who delivered a city its first taste of pro basketball glory. Carter brushed that comparison aside with his words, but not with his play. He balled the out from day one. Carter won 99 Rookie of the Year by a long shot. In his second season, he became one of the NBA's top 5 scorers and led the entire league in All-Star voting. Carter ushered in a new NBA millennium by almost single-handedly resurrecting the dunk contest. Vince was polite and likable, and he had enough star power to build Toronto's standing as a hotspot for basketball and basketball culture. And Carter didn't just make the Raptors cool. By his second season, he made them good. While Vince led the way, his cousin, Tracy McGrady, brought even more youthful energy off the bench. This sturdy cast of veterans rounded out a squad that, for the first time in its history, posted a winning record. Winning for the first time meant a first-ever trip to the playoffs. It went about as well as you'd expect for an upstart 6 seed led by a 23-year-old. The Knicks swept the Raptors. Carter played poorly, shooting a combined 8 of 37 in games 1 and 3. Dismal. The Game 2 loss included a little extra intrigue. Vince scored an efficient 27 points and got a chance to create his and Toronto's first signature playoff moment. In Madison Square Garden, on national TV, down 1 with the ball and time running out, Vince sized up the defense, made his move, and swung the ball to D. Brown, who missed. So, not a great first postseason. Out came the MJ comparisons. If this guy's the next Jordan, why is D. Brown taking the final shot? But Carter was already on record saying he was more interested in being a team player and building his own identity than being the next MJ. And MJ was already on record saying Vince doesn't play defense. Character analysis of the young star surfaced little hints of unease. Carter, for instance, pointed out that teammates sometimes thought he was faking his pained reactions after fouls. Newspaper columnists focused on the pep talk Vince's mother Michelle gave him before Game 2 of that series and how much he still deferred to her. Speaking of the team as a whole, Raptors coach Butch Carter made an observation that would immediately prove astute. He said expiring contracts and uncertain futures distracted his team. Chief among the soon-to-be free agents? Tracy McGrady. Indeed, tired of developing in his cousin's shadow, T-Mac bailed in the summer of 2000 for Orlando, where he immediately broke out as one of the league's best players. A mini beef hit the grill. The once close cousins didn't talk for a while, and Vince promised to score a lot against his old teammate. Charles Oakley, of all people, helped those two squash the beef, but the eyes of Toronto and the media only peered deeper into Vince's soul. Take this Sports Illustrated feature from January of 2001. Recounting Vince's famous dunk against France in the prior summer's Olympics, the esteemed S.L. Price described Carter as a bully, an ass, his celebration insufferable, and surprising from someone once viewed as the league's great nice hope, the antidote to thuggishness. Price went on to detail hardship Vince had experienced, recently during his rise to stardom, and years ago as a child. He scrutinized Vince's relationship with his mother, who Price deemed fiercely protective and always watching. He quoted Vince expressing appreciation for his first NBA coach, Butch Carter, who had since been fired. And he quoted veteran teammate Antonio Davis, who insisted Vince was motivated by getting mad, and that without such motivation, he was a different player. More psychoanalysis, more whiffs of tension. Carter grew tired of all the prying. He became standoffish with local and national media, and in what he later insisted was a joke, said Toronto fans didn't care about him. In that article from February of 2001, you'll also notice the reporter placing some of the blame for Carter's coldness on his mother, and issuing a bit of a warning. The media plays a big part in how a public figure is portrayed to fans. A sound point, especially considering the Toronto fan base. Many Canadian fans were already looking ahead to Carter's free agency, when he would surely leave them like McGrady did. For now, there was basketball to play. Carter suffered from chronic tendon pain known as jumper's knee, which cost him a handful of games and the will to defend his dunk contest championship. Nevertheless, Carter's regular season numbers ballooned even further. The team around him, now featuring eminent head coach Lenny Wilkens and a restocked supporting cast, improved to a franchise-best 47 wins. That set up a 2001 playoff rematch with the Knicks, a series in which Carter once again struggled in Games 1 and 3. But the Raptors hung around with a Game 2 victory. And this time, perhaps provoked by Oakley challenging his manhood, Vince rose to the occasion and led Toronto to victories in Games 4 and 5. The Raptors' first ever playoff win triggered a dream battle with the Eastern Conference's other rising megastar, Allen Iverson and his Philadelphia 76ers. It was a fantastic series. Both stars poured on the points. Iverson's 52-point Game 5 pushed Toronto to the brink of elimination, but a brilliant Carter performance sent it back to Philly for a winner-take-all Game 7. Just one thing. Carter told Raptors management he already had plans on May 20th, 2001. Fulfilling a promise to his mother, Vince had finished his degree at UNC and planned to attend the graduation ceremony in Chapel Hill. Vince insisted there would be no issue. He'd fly to Carolina, snatch his diploma and say thank you, then hop back on the plane to Philly well ahead of game time. No problem. His teammates, well, responses ranged from, I hope he thinks he's making the right decision, it's a big game but I'm behind him, to I hope the weather holds up, to no comment. To Carter's credit, the morning went as planned. He sounded super energized by the experience.
I'm just glad it's over.
But if anyone, teammate or otherwise, dared criticize his move,
I don't care.
Strange vibes from that conversation. But the whole ordeal would be forgotten, if not celebrated, if Carter delivered a great performance in Game 7. Well, Vince kinda sucked. Admittedly sluggish in the first couple minutes and just inaccurate throughout. Thankfully for the Raptors, Iverson was hurting and didn't play any better. Antonio Davis and Aaron McKie led their teams in scoring. A grueling Game 7 came down to one last play. Raptors ball, down 1, time expiring. Vince Carter got the ball and a shot to write his own story. He could be the guy who accomplished everything in one day, or the guy who bit off more than he could chew. Vince missed.
No good! And the Sixers hold on and advance to the conference finals!
The Raptors were eliminated. The Sixers advanced, eventually all the way to the finals. While plenty of peers, fans, and media maintained respect for Carter's decision, questions would linger. If you ask them today, members of the 2001 Raptors will tell you Vince's choice to attend graduation did mess with his routine. In 2018, Charles Oakley was characteristically blunt when asked if Carter's graduation trip cost them the victory.
If Vince doesn't go to graduation,
that way.
are you guys in a conference final?
No doubt.
No doubt.
Hands down.
But hey, even though it ended with controversy and heartbreak, 2001 brought progress. Vince's best season yet, the team's best season yet, a playoff win, and later that summer, a tremendous relief. In early August 2001, Carter announced an extension to his Raptors contract, 6 years and a maximum salary of over $90 million. He loved the city, he loved being a Raptor, and moreover, he loved Grunwald's aggressive management. the Raptors were spending to retain Carter's supporting cast, and they swung another big move to pry 38-year-old legend Hakeem Olajuwon away from his longtime home in Houston. Grunwald would later regret that one. In any event, the message to fans was clear. The Raptors planned to contend, and Vince was on board. The superstar didn't run away. Toronto was his home and his business, his donated court, his annual charity game, his nightclub that attracted stars from all over. This new era of commitment and certainty began well. The Raptors won 29 of their first 50 games and entered All-Star Weekend 2002 near the top of their division. But their last victory before the break saw Vince exit early, having aggravated that issue with his left leg. Carter, once again the leader in fan voting, would have to miss the All-Star game, and then a bunch of Raptors games after that. The Raps took a nosedive without Carter, and kept losing even after his return in late February. On March 19th, the once competent Raptors got crushed to drop their 17th out of the last 18 games, sinking to a record of 30-38. Before their next outing, Toronto pulled the plug on Vince. He went in for arthroscopic surgery to clean up his left knee, a procedure that did not directly repair the jumper's knee issue in his tendon. He'd just have to rest and rehabilitate that injury. So Vince was done for the year. Grunwald called it a disappointing moment and a disappointing season for the franchise and its cornerstone. Reporters couldn't help but point out that Carter, lacking leadership and gritless, no longer warranted comparisons to Michael Jordan. Jordan, by the way, was looking surprisingly strong in his first year of unretirement with the Wizards, just piling on at this point. Meanwhile, the Raptors' season suddenly tilted upward. Literally the day they lost Vince, Toronto commenced a lengthy winning streak. They rallied to a record of 42-40 and climbed back into a playoff matchup with the Pistons. The Raptors lost that series, but kept it surprisingly close against Jerry Stackhouse and company. Vince didn't show up for some of the action in Detroit, ostensibly because of knee swelling. Some didn't buy that explanation, and pointed out that just a year before, Carter had gone to extreme lengths to get where he wanted to be. When a reporter prodded Grunwald with skepticism about the reasons Carter wasn't on the sideline supporting his teammates, Grunwald cursed at him and called him a liar. If you promised someone $90-something million, then lost him for the most important part of the ensuing season, you too might be a little tense. And if you think that's tense, come join me for the 02-03 Raptors season. Vince's rehab culminated in a grand, Nike-sponsored tour of Asia during the summer of 02. Vince showed off his healthy legs with dunk exhibitions, and when asked about the Jordan comparisons, gave the headline writers some material. When it's all said and done, I can be better than him. So Carter dismissed Jordan comparisons when he was thriving, but now invited them while he was on the mend. This in turn invited the opinion that Carter didn't produce anything like Jordan, didn't lead like Jordan, and still consulted his mom on all matters. Harsh, but Carter had made a cocky and rather untimely comparison for a guy whose team had played better without him just months ago. Vince later insisted he was misquoted on the Jordan stuff. But fans quickly forgot about all that because days later, in the third game of the season, Carter strained his left quad again and sat out most of November. Well, he sat out basketball games anyway. During rehab, Carter created a bit of a kerfuffle by getting on stage and dancing at a Nelly concert in Toronto, all while his teammates were in Atlanta getting their asses kicked. Carter returned from that injury and controversy to a losing team. He grew frustrated when he couldn't turn them around. In mid-December, he strained his right knee, the other one, and this time missed over a month of action. Folks began to chatter. Former Raptor Keon Clark called Carter someone who wanted the recognition but wouldn't work for it. A reporter accused the franchise of babying Carter into mediocrity. Grunwald and Wilkins would neither push nor honestly appraise their pricey but often unavailable centerpiece. Carter swore he felt ready to play, but the team made him wait. The absent star felt compelled to defend his toughness and work ethic. Never would I run away from basketball. By the 03 All-Star break, Carter had played less than a third of Toronto's games, and the further depleted Raptors held a ghastly 14-34 record. But All-Star voters had not caught up to that. Though he'd barely played all season, Carter received well over 1 million votes and was slated to start for the Eastern Conference. Out came the critics. Charles Barkley led the chorus of people saying Carter hadn't played enough to earn a starting spot, and that he should give the spot to Jordan, who planned to retire at season's end. Vince was like, "But the people voted for me." And he held that stance until right before the game, an event during which Mariah Carey wore Jordan's jersey as a dress. Carter relented at the last minute and gave his starting spot to the luminary. The whole thing was way more awkward than it had to be. Just look at Jordan's face here.
This next All-Star has just asked to be replaced in the starting lineup by Michael Jordan. 6'7" forward from the Toronto Raptors, 4-time NBA All-Star, Vince Carter.
And even after relenting, Vince got criticized. The vibes never improved. The Raptors kept losing and dipped well out of the playoff picture. Near the end of a meaningless April loss to the Nets, Carter landed on Richard Jefferson's foot, twisted his ankle, and was scratched for the rest of the season. So, 2 years after signing his extension, Carter had yet to represent Toronto in another playoff game. He instead represented the Raptors at the 2003 lottery, where they fell a few picks short of the grand prize. Toronto made 2 big moves that summer. One was replacing Coach Wilkins with noted screaming enthusiast Kevin O'Neal. The other was using the 4th lottery pick on Chris Bosh, a gangly power forward who got a lovely welcome from Vince. The 2003-04 Raptors looked decent, and Grunwald stayed active, trading 2 of Carter's longtime teammates to the Bulls for Jalen Rose and Donyell Marshall. But after that okay start, the Raps buckled at midseason. Injuries piled up, Grunwald and O'Neal butted heads, and playoff hopes faded. Something had to give. In this case, everything gave. Raptors ownership, a company called Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, MLSE, led by a man named Richard Petty, canned Grunwald as GM in April, just weeks before his contract was set to expire anyway. There went the guy who'd drafted Carter, and who'd helped persuade him to stay long term. The person chosen to replace Grunwald would have to restore some joy to a disgruntled star while also developing the very promising Bosh, while also managing the expensive but uneven roster Grunwald had accumulated trying to keep Carter happy. Oh, and the new GM would have to replace Coach O'Neal, who mouthed off about Raptors ownership and got himself fired too. All this made the summer of 2004 huge. Carter went to his closest confidant within MLSE, Richard Tannenbaum, and received a promise that ownership would keep Carter abreast of the hiring process. They did not. Carter lobbied hard for NBA legend and former Magic executive Julius Erving to be considered for GM. But MLSE barely gave Dr. J an interview. By early June, he'd been ruled out entirely. Instead, Toronto ownership surprised their star by hiring Rob Babcock. Weeks later, Babcock used the Raptors' lottery pick to draft Rafael Araujo over Andre Iguodala. A mistake. A couple days after that, Babcock hired Sam Mitchell as head coach. Vince's distance from these decisions prompted trade rumors. Babcock denied those rumors, but then kind of made it sound like a trade wasn't totally out of the question, then kind of put the ball in Vince's court. So what did Vince have to say? At that point, publicly, out of his own mouth, very little. Speaking from his summer camp, Vince only announced that he wouldn't say anything. But Nav Bhatia, a well-known Raptors superfan and friend of Vince's, was not so coy. He went on record to say that Carter had no problem with the new GM or the new coach. Vince did have a problem with Petty and company. Not just because of what happened with Grunwald and Erving and so forth, but because the team had failed to acquire any additional all-star caliber players. Vince had been particularly hopeful he'd get to play with Jamal Magloire or Steve Nash, 2 Canadian products who fans would have also loved. And some fans took up his fight. A Keep Vince, Trade Petty movement popped up around Carter's charity game in late July. Of course, none of those powerful people were going anywhere. So by late summer, Vince's camp began to make some noise. The New York Daily News reported in August that Vince and his agent had met with the Raptors to request a trade. Their reporting, of course, focused on the Knicks. A couple weeks later, Vince said it himself, publicly. It's time for a trade. Not because of the fans, not because of the city, just because it's time. Vince said he was tired of giving this franchise and its personnel decisions a chance. Time to move on. But September is pretty late in the offseason to deal away your star, especially when the whole league knows what's going on. Opening night arrived without a trade on the table. In the meantime, the franchise fired the athletic trainer who'd become Vince's friend and gave away the parking spot they'd once reserved for Vince's mom. The players knew the lingering trade demand would be awkward, potentially a big distraction if it went unresolved. And Vince's public statements risked alienating some teammates. Those teammates did their best to placate Vince, even rallying in his defense when the Sporting News ranked Carter number 41 on their list of the league's best players. Mitchell prepared to start his first head coaching job with a lot to manage, though he professed no expectation Vince would cause a distraction. Well, on that topic, we must turn to Jalen Rose, who was a Raptor in November of 2004. According to Rose, the team was in Portland for their 7th game of the season when Coach Mitchell approached Vince while he was getting treatment in the locker room. Here's the rest of that story.
And Sam Mitchell made a comment to Vince about always being injured and always being on the training table. So that's kind of how Vince nudged Sam. Sam nudged Vince back. Before you know it, they tangled up and they really trying to slam each other on the ground.
Yes, Rose says Vince body slammed his rookie head coach in like the second week of the season. Mitchell still insists the fight didn't happen as described, that it was more of a jokey interaction in which they fell down and that he and Carter had a great relationship. Either way, November 2004 was a strange month. Strange in obvious ways, like Vince getting booed by fans in Toronto, and strange in less obvious ways. Another story from the time goes that at home against Seattle, Carter deliberately tipped off some Sonics players to a play Toronto was running in the final minute of a close loss. But while fans were turning against him, Carter didn't express all his disgruntlement behind the scenes. He, for instance, smirked and gave petulant responses to questions about why he seemed to be withholding the most entertaining part of his game.
I don't want to dunk anymore. Dunking's overrated.
The Raptors grew desperate to trade Carter, but getting a fair return only grew more difficult in early December. Carter came up limping after straining his Achilles against the Pistons and was sidelined indefinitely. Fans and media groaned. Babcock insisted that trading an injured Vince Carter was the last thing on his mind. A week later, Babcock traded an injured Vince Carter to the New Jersey Nets. The return package was underwhelming at the time and looks even worse in retrospect. Carter's injury history, reputation, and contract were such that Toronto felt compelled to give away the most important player in franchise history for Eric Williams, Aaron Williams, Alonzo Mourning, who refused to play in Toronto, and 2 first-round picks that didn't amount to much. Carter stayed sidelined for a bit with the Nets, including their first visit to Toronto just a couple days after the trade. He debuted just before the new year, and just after the new year, gave an interview to TNT's John Thompson. This part of the conversation further incensed Raptors fans.
Do you think Vince Carter has pushed himself as hard as he should have pushed himself?
In years past, no. I was just fortunate enough to have the talent and be able to, you get spoiled when you're able to do a lot of things and you see that and you really don't have to work at it. But now I think with all the injuries and the things that have gone on, I have to work a little harder.
Carter and Thompson both said that section was edited to take quotes out of context. Vince swore he had never dogged it in Toronto.
Everybody said, I didn't come to play, I didn't play hard, I didn't do this. Oh my goodness, never that.
But between that and the other leaked stories, the heat was already on for Vince's return to the city in uniform. That was April 15th, 2005. The Raptors sat well behind the Nets in the Atlantic Division standings, headed for another lottery while Vince and company were headed to the playoffs. Vince was healthy and playing solidly in New Jersey. His numbers, splashed across the home broadcast, looked way better than they had to start the season in Toronto. Both parties wore their feelings. Carter showed up at the Air Canada Centre in the jersey of Julius Erving, his preferred candidate for the Toronto GM job back in 2004. Raptor fans showed up with all manner of anti-Vince material. Vandalized jerseys, bibs with his number 15, and so many signs. The fans booed Vince's introduction and reveled in an early Vince miss. But Carter found his bearings to score 24 of his 39 points in the second half of a blowout Nets victory. The relationship would stay this shape for some time. The Nets came to town, Vince got booed, the Nets won, Vince said something catty about the booing. In January of 2006, Carter came to town and had a jokey mid-game slap fight with his old teammate Morris Peterson. The refs misinterpreted what was happening and ejected Peterson. Then Vince hit the game winner. In December of 2006, Vince got booed once more in his first ever loss to the Raptors in Toronto. Ironically, Chris Bosh missed that game for the Raps because of a knee injury. But Bosh was developing into a real first option, and his rise propelled the Raptors ahead of New Jersey in the standings. The Nets visited the Raptors in February of 2007, days before Bosh was set to make his second All-Star appearance, in the starting lineup unlike Vince. The Raptors beat the Nets that night, and Toronto fans showered Bosh with MVP chants, which appeared to vex Toronto's last All-Star. Vince said he was just messing around. Bosh said, hey, things have changed around here. But they hadn't all the way changed. In the spring of 2007, the Raptors held home court advantage for a first-round playoff matchup against Vince and the Nets. Before the series, Coach Mitchell wearily told reporters and fans to let go of their beef with Vince Carter. Bosh somewhat presciently explained the dynamics of the lingering Carter hatred. When fans loved him, they really loved him, and it's a thin line between love and hate. Vince got booed throughout the series and didn't play particularly well. The Nets pulled off an upset anyway, but got wrecked by LeBron James and the Cavs in the next round. And from then on, the beef kinda stagnated. The Raptors made some bad decisions and fell into a lull, eventually losing Bosh in 2010. The Nets floundered and then traded Carter, who had one fun year with the Magic, then spent the next decade bouncing from team to team, settling into a role as a fuzzy, lovable old veteran. It was a surprisingly long, gentle twilight for a player who once seemed like he might fly too close to the sun and burn out his knees forever. Vince showed up in Toronto each year wearing a different uniform and got a few boos but also some love. Right before his 37th birthday in 2014, Vince came to Toronto as a Dallas Maverick, got booed, then threw down a huge dunk as if to remind everyone of how this whole thing started.
Ontario and Pacific with Michael Graves.
And young Raps fans probably needed some reminding. Their team was on the rise again with new stars, and it felt increasingly silly to disparage a graying benchwarmer. The team even considered signing Vince. 2014 brought the 20th anniversary of the Raptors franchise and the 10-year anniversary of the dismal Carter trade. Sportsnet ran this Michael Grange feature with a big ol' header saying it was time for Toronto to forgive Vince. At least one Raptors player said the same. And on November 19th, 2014, with Carter's Grizzlies in town, the organization took a calculated risk. They played a video tribute for Vince. Here was the scene after the video concluded. Standing ovation. Vince in tears. Me right now, kind of on the verge of tears. It's a beautiful moment, and one that announcers observed could have gone differently.
At first, a lot of fans started booing, and then they started rising.
That felt like Toronto collectively deciding it was time to let go. In the years following, the guy who'd once been their electric, immature young gun became one of the oldest and longest tenured players in NBA history. Toronto knew every Vince visit might be his last, and fans showed their appreciation accordingly, like this standing ovation in early 2019. Months later, they watched their team win it all. The Raptors, the Toronto Raptors, became NBA champions, and that's not all. Entering a new decade, Canada claimed not only the NBA's best pro franchise, but many of its exciting young players. It had become a basketball nation. None of that was promised. None of it even seemed plausible until Toronto landed its first real star. A star who fell in love with the city, committed to it, and inspired its future generations. Thanks to misfortune and mistakes, nobody came out of the relationship looking great. Not the fragile, moody athlete, not the inept franchise, not the vindictive fan base. But time healed these wounds. The narrative threads of Vince Carter and Toronto ran together, then in parallel. They gnarled, then frayed, then separated entirely. Now they've reconnected. All parties understand how much they mean to one another. This is one story, and it has a happy ending. This beef is history. Thanks for watching Beef History. If you want to see more about that Vince Carter dunk contest, check out this episode of Rewinder or watch anything here. I promise you'll like it, and I promise that if you subscribe to SB Nation, you will not regret it.